Hello there. Come closer. That's right, don't be shy. It's just us here, in the quiet, in the dark. You can call me Dr. Bonechill, and tonight, well, tonight I have something for you. Or perhaps, to you. It's not a gift, not in the way you might think of one, wrapped in pretty paper with a hopeful bow. No, what I have is a burden, a shiver of truth that's been looking for a place to settle, and I believe it's found its way to you, hasn't it? We all have them, you know. Those little towns, the ones that flicker at the edges of memory just outside the glow of the streetlights in our minds. Places we grew up in, or perhaps places that grew around us, silent and watchful. We think we know them, every crack in the sidewalk, every rustling tree. But what if those towns, those comfortable, familiar blankets of suburbia, are stitched with threads of something else? Something forgotten, something that wants to be remembered. Tonight, I'm pulling back a corner of that blanket. We're going to talk about 3 such places. 3 creepy, true, forgotten town horror stories. True? Well, truth in a story is a slippery thing, isn't it? It's about the truth of the fear, the truth of the shiver that runs down your spine when you realize the ordinary isn't ordinary at all. These aren't tales of distant castles or mythical beasts. These are whispers from next door, from down the street, from the house you pass every day and never really see. Have you ever held an object, something old, something discarded, and felt a resonance? A faint hum of a life once lived, a story wanting to be told? Most of us dismiss it. A trick of the mind? A fancy? But what if it's not? What if some things hold more than just memories? What if they hold a power? A presence waiting for a gentle touch, an unwitting invitation? That's the question that unraveled the lives we're about to witness. It's a question that, once it takes root, can turn the most familiar landscape into a hunting ground for the unexplainable. So, settle in, turn down the lights if you dare, and as we prepare to step into the shadows, I have a small request for you, my friend. If you find a sliver of your own fears reflected in these tales, if that uncomfortable little knot tightens in your stomach, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It lets the darkness know it's not alone. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to Dr. Bonechill. We're on a journey to 10,000 fellow travelers into the unsettling, and every new voice helps light the path, or perhaps deepens the shadows. Finally, I'd love to hear your thoughts, your own whispers. Comment below with your experiences, your theories, or just a sign that you're listening. It means more than you know. Now let the streetlights flicker. Let the familiar become strange. Our first story, it begins in a place much like your own. A quiet street, a new house, and a small, innocuous discovery. It's called The Weeping Lullaby. It all started with the house, of course. Linden, street number 117, my wife Sarah and I had just sunk every last dime into it. A classic 2-story colonial. A bit run down, sure, but it had good bones, as they say. Big yard for the kids we hoped to have. The kind of place you imagine growing old in. Our little slice of the American dream, nestled in the sleepy, historic town of Oak Haven. A place that prided itself on its quaint charm and centuries-old trees. Forgotten? Not Oak Haven. Or so I thought. We were in the attic a few weeks after moving in. A sweltering August afternoon. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from a grimy window. It was crammed with the leavings of previous owners. Broken chairs, stacks of yellowed newspapers, the usual detritus of lives past. I was wrestling with a heavy, moth-eaten trunk when my hand brushed against something small, tucked away in a dark corner, almost hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It was a music box, not the delicate porcelain kind you see in antique shops. This was wooden, plain, dark-stained oak about the size of a shoebox. No carvings, no embellishments, just a small, tarnished brass keyhole on the front. It felt surprisingly heavy, solid. There was no key with it. "Find something interesting, Mark?" Sarah called from across the attic, her voice muffled by a dust mask. "Maybe," I said, turning it over in my hands. "Old music box. Locked, though." Sarah came over, intrigued. "Wonder what it plays." We took it downstairs, cleaned off the grime. Later that week, I picked the lock. It wasn't difficult. The mechanism was old and simple. Inside, there was no ballerina, no spinning figurine. Just the gleaming brass teeth of the comb, the cylinder, and a small velvet-lined compartment. Empty. Huh, Sarah said, disappointed. No treasure. I wound the mechanism. The clicks were stiff, reluctant. Then, the music started. It wasn't a familiar tune, not a classical piece or a nursery rhyme I recognized. It was slow, melancholic, a simple melody that seemed to ache with a quiet sadness. It was strangely beautiful, in a mournful sort of way. Pretty, Sarah conceded, though her brow was furrowed. A bit sad, though, isn't it? We didn't think much more of it. I put it on the mantelpiece in the living room, a curious little antique, an icebreaker, maybe. That was my first mistake, thinking it was just an it. The first few nights after I played it, I had trouble sleeping. Not nightmares exactly, just a restlessness, a feeling of being unsettled. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, and the melody from the music box would drift through my mind unbidden. That soft, weeping lullaby. Then I started hearing it when the box was closed, just faintly. A few notes, carried on the air, like someone humming in the next room. I'd get up, check the living room. The music box would be sitting there, silent, lid closed. I told myself it was the house settling, old pipes, the wind. Oak Haven was full of old houses after all, full of old noises, but the feeling of unease grew. It was like a constant low-grade hum beneath the surface of our new life. I'd find myself standing in the living room just staring at the box. It didn't look menacing. It was just a wooden box. Yet I started to feel a pull towards it, a morbid curiosity. One evening, Sarah was out with her sister. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I was reading in the den, trying to distract myself, but the silence seemed to press in. And then I heard it again, the melody. Clearer this time, as if the box were open, playing softly in the living room. I walked in. The lid was closed, but the air itself seemed to thrum with those sad, gentle notes. I picked it up. The wood felt cold, unnaturally so, and as I held it, the melody in my head or in the room or wherever the hell it was coming from grew stronger. That's when I first felt her. It wasn't a vision, not a ghostly apparition. It was a feeling, an overwhelming wave of sorrow, of profound, boundless grief washing over me. It was so intense I nearly dropped the box. My eyes welled up. I felt a lump in my throat, a crushing weight on my chest, as if I were experiencing someone else's heartbreak. A woman's heartbreak. It was old, so terribly old and raw. I slammed the music box down, my heart hammering. The feeling receded, leaving me shaken, breathless. What in God's name was that? I didn't tell Sarah. How could I? She'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the music, the box, and that wave of emotion were all connected. And connected to this house. This town. I started researching Oak Haven's history, spending hours at the local library, poring over dusty ledgers and faded maps. I was looking for something, anything, that might explain what I was feeling. I learned about the town's founding, its prominent families, its slow slide from a bustling mill town to a quiet suburb. Standard stuff. Nothing about weeping women or cursed music boxes. The experiences, though, they escalated. The phantom melody became a near-constant companion when I was alone. Sometimes I'd catch a scent in the air along with it. A faint perfume, like dried flowers, old lace. And the sorrow. It would hit me at random moments. Washing dishes, driving to work. A sudden, incapacitating wave of grief that wasn't mine. I started to see things, too. Not full apparitions, but flickers. A shift in the light in the corner of my eye. A shadow that moved when it shouldn't have. Once, waking from a doze on the sofa, I saw a shape in the armchair opposite me just for a second. The impression of someone small, frail, hunched over as if in tears. Then it was gone. The music box became the focal point of my fear, my obsession. I tried putting it back in the attic, burying it under a pile of old blankets. But the melody, the sorrow, it was still there, seeping through the floorboards, perhaps even stronger, as if angered by the attempt to silence it. I brought it back down. I didn't know what else to do. It felt like it wanted to be heard. One night, I woke up, bolt upright. The house was cold, deathly silent. No crickets, no hum of the refrigerator, just an absolute suffocating stillness. And the melody was playing, not in my head, not faintly. It was coming from downstairs, from the music box itself. Loud, clear, as if someone had wound it fully and thrown open the lid. My blood ran cold. Sarah was asleep beside me, oblivious. I crept out of bed, down the stairs, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The living room was dark, but I could see the music box on the mantel, silhouetted against the faint moonlight from the window. The lid was wide open, and the room was filled with that scent of dried flowers so strong it was cloying. The sorrow was a palpable presence, heavy, suffocating. I felt like I was drowning in it. I forced myself to move, to approach the mantel. As I reached for the lid to close it, to silence the weeping tune, I saw something reflected in the polished wood of the box's interior, just below the musical mechanism. Not my own reflection. A face, pale, indistinct, shimmering in the dim light. A woman's face, her eyes wide with an ancient, unbearable pain. Her lips were moving, as if trying to speak, or perhaps to sing along with the mournful notes. I recoiled, a strangled cry escaping my lips. The image, if it was an image, vanished. The music continued, relentless. I finally understood. The box wasn't just playing a tune, it was a conduit, a vessel for her grief, her story. A story intrinsically linked to Oakhaven, a story someone had tried to silence, to lock away, to forget. The forgotten part of this town wasn't a place, but a person, a sorrow. I slammed the lid shut. The music stopped abruptly. The oppressive atmosphere lessened, but the chill in my soul remained. I never told Sarah the full extent of it. I couldn't. But she knew something was wrong. I was jumpy, irritable, losing weight. The light in my eyes, she said, was gone. Our dream house was becoming my private nightmare. I thought about getting rid of the music box, throwing it away, breaking it. But a strange reluctance held me back. A part of me, a dark, terrified part, felt responsible for it now, or perhaps responsible to it, to her. What if breaking it unleashed something worse? What if her sorrow, uncontained, latched onto me, onto Sarah, onto the house itself forever? The weeping lullaby still echoes in the quiet corners of my mind, a constant reminder of that hidden, sorrowful power. I still feel her sometimes, a whisper of grief in an empty room. The house on Linden Street is still our home, but it's a home shared. We live with the echo of a forgotten sorrow, a melody that refuses to fade. Oakhaven keeps its secrets, and I, it seems, am now one of its keepers. I often wonder how many other ordinary homes on ordinary streets hold such things, such quiet, insistent sadness waiting for someone to just listen. What do you think? What would you have done with the music box? More importantly, what forgotten whispers echo in your own town? I need to take a breath after that one. We'll delve into our next forgotten town, our next unsettling truth, in just a moment. Stay with me. Story 2. It's always a quiet place, isn't it? The ones you think are safe. Oakhaven held its share of sorrow, locked away in a melody. But towns have more than one way of remembering, more than one forgotten secret eager to find the light, or perhaps to find a new guardian. Our next story takes us to a neighborhood much like any other, where the past wasn't just buried, it was watching. waiting. This is the story of a man named Arthur and what he found in the shadow of the old mill. He calls it The Watcher on the Ridge. My name is Arthur Pendleton, though most folks just call me Art. I've lived in Hemlock Creek for the better part of 50 years. Seen it change from a scruffy, half-forgotten little outcrop on the edge of the county to rows upon rows of neat suburban houses, mine included. Maple Drive. Sounds idyllic, doesn't it? For a long time, it was. We backed onto a stretch of undeveloped land, a ridge that was once the site of the old Blackwood Mill, burned down long before my time. Most people didn't even know a mill had ever stood there. Just a forgotten piece of Hemlock Creek's past, overgrown and ignored. I'm a tinkerer, always have been. My garage is my sanctuary, filled with bits and pieces I've salvaged, things I intend to fix one day. About a year ago, I was clearing some brush at the very back of my property, near the base of that ridge. The town council had been making noises about finally developing it, and I figured I'd tidy up my borderline. That's when I found it, half buried in the dirt and tangled roots. It was a weather vane, or what was left of it. Cast iron, shaped like a stern-looking rooster, its comb sharp and its tail feathers fanned aggressively. It was heavily rusted, pitted with age, but surprisingly intact. The directional arms were missing, but the rooster itself, mounted on its spindle, was solid. It had a certain presence, a stoic, watchful quality. I remember thinking it must have come from the old mill, a relic from that forgotten time. Excited by the find, I dragged it out, cleaned it up as best I could, and mounted it on a sturdy post in my backyard, right at the edge where the manicured lawn met the wilder growth of the ridge. It looked rather distinguished there, I thought, a silent sentinel facing out towards the old mill grounds. Sarah, my wife, just rolled her eyes and said it was another piece of junk, but she indulged my hobbies. For the first few weeks, it was just that, a rustic garden ornament. I'd glance at it, note the direction the rooster pointed, even though without the NSEW arms, it was more a general indicator of the wind. It was just there. The first odd thing was subtle. I started noticing that the rooster seemed to point towards things before they happened. One afternoon, it was aimed directly at Mrs. Henderson's house down the street. An hour later, an ambulance pulled up outside her place. She'd had a fall. A coincidence, I told myself. Just the wind. But it kept happening. It pointed towards the park the day a branch from one of the ancient oaks snapped and crashed down, narrowly missing a group of children. It swiveled to face downtown the night the old bakery, a Hemlock Creek institution, caught fire. Each time I'd see the rooster, still and resolute, aimed like a silent accusation or a grim forecast. I started keeping a little journal, noting its direction, the date, the time. A pattern began to emerge, undeniable and deeply unsettling. The weather vane wasn't just indicating wind, it was indicating events. Unfortunate events, accidents, misfortune. Sleep became a luxury. I'd find myself waking in the dead of night, compelled to go to the window and look at the rooster. Sometimes in the moonlight, its corroded surface seemed to gleam, its single unblinking eye. The other was long lost to rust, fixed on some unseen point in the darkness. The feeling it gave me was no longer curiosity, but a cold, creeping dread. It wasn't a charming antique, it was a harbinger. I tried to talk to Sarah about it. "Honey," I said one morning, trying to sound casual, "do you ever think that rooster points at things?" She gave me that look, the one that said she was debating calling our son to ask if Dad was finally losing his marbles. "Art, it's a weather vane. It points where the wind blows. Maybe you should spend less time in that garage." Denial. It's a comfortable blanket. I wanted to pull it over my head too, but the evidence in my journal was too stark. The rooster knew. The unease began to solidify into a more personal fear. The rooster didn't just point at general misfortunes in Hemlock Creek. Sometimes it pointed closer, much closer. One Tuesday it was aimed directly at my next-door neighbor Tom's prize-winning rose bushes. I didn't think much of it. What bad could happen to roses? The next morning, Tom was out there cursing a blue streak. Some kind of blight had swept through overnight, turning his perfect blooms into withered, blackened husks. He was devastated. I just felt cold. The weather vane, I realized, wasn't just predicting. It felt like it was observing, or worse, directing. This hidden power wasn't just passive. It had an agency I couldn't comprehend. The ridge behind my house, the site of the old Blackwood Mill, took on a new significance. I found myself staring up at it, wondering about the lives that had been lived there, the events that had transpired. What secrets did that forgotten place hold? Was the rooster a conduit to some lingering consciousness from the mill's past? Some bitter, watchful spirit tied to the land? I started to feel watched, not just by the rooster, but by the ridge itself. The trees seemed darker, their shadows longer. The wind rustling through the leaves sounded like whispers. My backyard, once my little patch of suburban paradise, began to feel like the edge of something old and hostile. The climax, if you can call it that, it was more of a breaking point for me, came during the first big storm of the autumn. The wind howled, rain lashed against the windows. I was, of course, fixated on the rooster. It was spinning wildly at first, then, in a lull, it locked onto a direction with an almost vicious certainty. It was pointing directly at my house, specifically at my son Michael's old bedroom window. Michael was grown, lived across the country, but we kept his room as it was. Terror, sharp and cold, pierced through me. This was no vague prediction. This was personal. This was a threat. Art? What is it? Sarah asked, seeing the look on my face. I couldn't speak. I just grabbed her hand and pulled her away from the window, into the hallway, further into the house. Stay here, I managed, my voice hoarse. Just then, an ungodly crack echoed through the storm, louder than any thunder. The house shuddered. A sound like a freight train roaring past, then a deafening crash from the back of the house. We rushed to see. A massive limb from one of the old, untamed trees on the ridge, a tree that had stood for probably a century, had snapped. It had fallen directly onto the back of the house, crushing the gutter, shattering Michael's bedroom window, and tearing a gaping hole in the roof. If anyone had been in that room, I looked out at the weather vane. The rooster was still pointing at the devastation, almost smugly. Its silent iron gaze seemed to say, "I told you so. I showed you so." That was when I understood. This wasn't just a passive observer. It was a claim. The forgotten ridge, the spirit of the old mill, whatever it was that imbued that rooster with its terrible prescience, it was staking its territory, and my home, my family, was on its land. The next morning, under a bruised and sullen sky, I took a sledgehammer from the garage. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was firm. Sarah watched from the kitchen window, her face pale, no longer doubting. Walked out to the weather vane. The rooster stared back, defiant. I didn't hesitate. I swung the hammer with all my strength. The first blow glanced off its cast-iron body with a clang that echoed through the unnaturally quiet morning. The second connected solidly with the spindle bending it. The third shattered the rooster's head from its body. It fell to the grass with a dull thud, its reign of silent terror over. I didn't just break it, I obliterated it, smashed the pieces, gathered them up, and drove them to the county landfill, burying them under a pile of refuse myself. The repairs to the house took weeks. The insurance company called it an act of God. I knew better. It was an act of something much older, much more terrestrial, and infinitely more patient. Things quieted down after that. The oppressive feeling of being watched lessened. The ridge seemed to recede, to become just a piece of land again. Maple Drive felt a little more like home. But I'm changed. I don't look at old things the same way. I don't scavenge for forgotten treasures anymore. Sometimes when the wind blows just right, I think I hear a faint metallic screech from the direction of the ridge, like something turning, trying to find its direction. And I know deep in my bones that some forgotten things don't stay buried, they just wait. And the ridge, The ridge still watches. Hemlock Creek has its secrets, and that weather vane, even in pieces miles away, showed me one I can never forget. I often walk my property line staring at that ridge, and I wonder, what else is up there just waiting to be found, or waiting to make itself known? Another piece of the ordinary, twisted into the unsettling. A silent guardian that became a malevolent prophet. It makes you wonder about the statues in the park, doesn't it? The gargoyles on old buildings. What do they see? What do they know? We have one more forgotten town to visit tonight, my friends. One more truth to unearth. Don't go anywhere. The deepest shadows often lie closest to home. Some secrets, as Arthur discovered, are more aggressive, more territorial. They demand their space, their recognition. But our final journey tonight takes us to a place where the forgotten isn't just a landmark or a memory, but woven into the very fabric of sight itself. It's about a man named David, who moved into a brand new house in a brand new development thinking he was starting fresh. He didn't realize the land beneath his feet had older ideas. This last story, it's called The Spectacles of Sparrow Creek. My name is David. My wife Chloe and I bought our first home last spring in the newly minted Willow Creek Estates. It was one of those sprawling suburban developments that spring up almost overnight, built on land that used to be, well, no one really said. Just fields, I guess. Or so we thought. Our house was pristine, smelling of fresh paint and new carpets. A blank slate. That's what we wanted. The previous owner, according to the realtor, had only lived there for about 6 months before being transferred for work. Barely settled in. During our first walkthrough after getting the keys, Chloe was measuring for curtains, and I was exploring the garage. Tucked away on a high shelf, covered in a fine layer of drywall, dust was a small plain cardboard box. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, was a pair of spectacles. They were old-fashioned with simple round wire frames, the kind your great-grandfather might have worn. The glass lenses were thick, surprisingly clean. No case, no markings. Just these spectacles. Look what I found, I said to Chloe, holding them up. Someone left their specs behind. She glanced over. Probably costume glasses or something weird, just tossed them. But I didn't. I don't know why. I slipped them into my pocket. Later that evening, with Chloe busy in the kitchen, I took them out. On a whim, I tried them on. I expected the world to go blurry. My own eyesight is perfect. Instead, everything sharpened. Not in a normal way. It was an almost unnerving clarity. Colors seemed deeper, edges crisper, but there was something else. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer at the periphery of my vision, like heat haze on a summer road. I took them off quickly, a strange little thrum of unease in my chest. Must be a weird prescription, I muttered, putting them on my nightstand. The next day, I was out in the yard trying to figure out where to plant some saplings Chloe had bought. Our street, Willow Creek Drive, was still a mix of finished houses and active construction sites. I put the spectacles on again, mostly out of boredom. The world snapped into that same hyperfocus, and then I saw it. For a fleeting second, the half-built house across the street wasn't half-built. It was a field, a rough, untamed field with tall, swaying grass. And standing in the middle of it was a woman, her back to me, wearing a simple, faded dress. Then I blinked and it was gone. Just construction workers, scaffolding, the whine of a saw. My heart hammered. "What the hell?" I whispered. I snatched the glasses off. The scene was normal. I put them back on. Normal. Had I imagined it? Stress of the new house, maybe? But it happened again. A few days later, looking through the spectacles down our street, our neat asphalted street with its newly poured sidewalks, I saw a dirt track, rutted and muddy. A horse-drawn cart, piled high with what looked like timber, trundled slowly along it, driven by a man in overalls and a wide-brimmed hat. The image was there for only a heartbeat, superimposed over the modern scene like a ghostly photograph, before vanishing. This wasn't just a trick of the light. The spectacles were showing me something else. something that wasn't there. Or perhaps something that used to be there. I became obsessed. I'd wear them for short periods, my nerves jangling. The glimpses became more frequent, more vivid. I saw old weathered farmhouses where new colonials now stood. I saw unpaved laneways instead of cul-de-sacs. I saw people in old-fashioned clothes going about tasks I couldn't comprehend, their faces often indistinct, their forms slightly translucent, like figures in a dream. They never interacted with the modern world. They existed within their own time, and the spectacles were the window. Willow Creek Estates, I began to suspect, wasn't built on empty fields. It was built on something forgotten. A whole community, perhaps. A place called Sparrow Creek. I'd heard the name whispered, once by an old-timer at the hardware store when I mentioned where I lived. He'd just shaken his head and said, "Sparrow Creek. That place had a hard time." He didn't elaborate. The visions weren't always pastoral. Sometimes they were deeply unsettling. Looking at Mr. Henderson's perfectly manicured lawn next door, through the spectacles I saw a patch of scorched earth and the fleeting, horrifying image of a burning structure. Once, focusing on the little park at the end of our block, I saw a small fenced-off area with several rough wooden crosses. A graveyard, right where the kids' swings now stood. The hidden power of these spectacles wasn't just showing me the past. It was showing me the trauma of the past, the sorrow, the hardship, the things that made a place want to be forgotten. I tried to research Sparrow Creek, local historical society, library archives. There were scant mentions. A small farming community, established in the late 19th century, suffered a series of misfortunes, crop failures, a bad fire in the early 1920s, then silence. The records just sort of petered out. It was as if Sparrow Creek had simply ceased to exist, willingly erased from the county maps and memories. Chloe noticed the change in me. I was withdrawn, jumpy, always staring out the windows, often with those damn spectacles perched on my nose. "David, you're scaring me," she said one night. "You're barely sleeping. You look haunted. What is it with those glasses?" I tried to explain. I told her what I was seeing. She listened, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief, then to a kind of gentle pity. "Honey," she said softly, taking my hand. "There's nothing out there. It's a new development. Maybe you should talk to someone." Her reaction was expected, but it still hurt. I was alone with this. The spectacles and the spectral world they revealed were my burden alone. The line between their world and mine began to blur. I'd see a flash of an old-timey figure without the glasses on, just for a split second. I'd hear faint, muffled sounds, a distant hymn, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, when the house was silent. The emotional toll was immense. Fear, yes, but also a profound sadness for this lost community of Sparrow Creek, for their forgotten lives and unmourned tragedies. And a growing dread that their world was somehow trying to break through, or that I was becoming trapped between the two. The breaking point wasn't a dramatic event, like Arthur's storm. It was quieter, more insidious. I was looking at our own house through the spectacles from the street, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw it as it might have been in Sparrow Creek's time. A small, dilapidated cabin, smoke curling from a stone chimney. And on the porch, a figure. A man, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow, staring directly at me. Not through me, not as a ghostly imprint. At me. He raised a hand slowly, as if in warning, or beckoning. I ripped the spectacles off, my breath catching in my throat. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. He'd seen me. The barrier was thinner than I thought. I haven't worn the spectacles since that day. They sit in that cardboard box, back on the highest shelf in the garage. I should throw them away, smash them, bury them, but I can't. It's not just the fear of what might happen if I do, it's something else. A morbid connection. A sense that I know something vital about this land, this place that calls itself Willow Creek. I still see things sometimes, even without them. Fleeting shadows in my peripheral vision. A scent of wood smoke when there's no fire. The world feels thinner, less solid. I know what lies beneath the fresh paint and green lawns. I know about Sparrow Creek, its joys, its sorrows, its forgotten people. They are part of the soil, part of the air. Our dream house is built on a grave, not just of bodies perhaps, but of memories. And I, thanks to a pair of discarded spectacles, am the unwilling custodian of those memories. Willow Creek Estates thrives, oblivious. But I know, I always will. And sometimes, late at night when the house is still, I wonder if that man on the porch is still watching, waiting for me to look again. What if the true forgotten horror isn't just the past itself, but the realization that it never truly leaves us? 3 stories. 3 ordinary lives brushed by the unsettling tendrils of the forgotten. A music box weeping a lost sorrow. A weather vane forecasting doom from a bygone era. And a pair of spectacles revealing a past that refuses to stay buried. Each a reminder that the ground beneath our feet, the objects we touch, the very air we breathe in our quiet little towns, might be saturated with echoes, with powers we don't understand. It makes you think, doesn't it? What forgotten histories lie dormant in your own neighborhood? What seemingly innocent object in your home might be a key, a conduit to something else? Perhaps these stories haven't been a gift of entertainment, but a quiet word of caution. A nudge to look a little closer, to listen a little harder. The world is far stranger and often more terrifying than we allow ourselves to believe. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Bonechill, on this unsettling journey tonight. If these tales have resonated with you, if they've stirred that little flicker of unease in the back of your mind, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. We delve into the shadows regularly here, and there's always room for one more by the fire. Please, do share your own thoughts or similar experiences in the comments below. Your stories, your whispers, they become part of this tapestry of the unknown. Until next time, try to remember, some things are forgotten for a reason. Sleep well, if you can.